Some folks say home is where you hang your hat, but I reckon home is where someone waits for you to come back. Those words had been etched into her mind for weeks now. Hannah Montgomery had grown up surrounded by luxury, the daughter of one of the wealthiest families in New York. But no amount of silver or diamonds could silence the voice inside her that told her she didn't belong. The glittering society events, the perfect smiles, the endless promises of happiness, all felt hollow. So, on a crisp autumn morning, she made a decision that would change her life forever. She picked up a letter from a matchmaking agency and decided to follow the path of countless other women before her. She chose the life of a mail-order bride, not for a prince or a man of wealth, but for a cowboy, a man whose name she only knew from a few words on paper, Jason O'Connor, rancher in Montana. She wasn't looking for riches anymore. She was looking for something real, something simple, something true. She packed her bags, left behind the marble floors and golden chandeliers, and boarded a train that would take her far away from everything she had ever known. The air was thick with dust, and the sun beat down relentlessly as the train chugged through the open landscape. The sounds of the city faded into the distance, replaced by the whistle of the train and the soft murmurs of passengers lost in their own thoughts. Hannah's mind raced. What had she gotten herself into? Was this truly the life she had been searching for? She had heard stories of women like her, who had traded the comforts of high society for the hard, lonely lives of women on the frontier. They came seeking a fresh start, but what did they find? A life of isolation, uncertainty, and hard work? Or could she really find something deeper here, something worth more than money or status? The journey was long, and the landscape changed with every mile. From the green fields of the Midwest to the rugged, rocky terrain of the West, the world outside the window seemed endless. By the time she arrived at the small station in Copper Creek, Montana, the weight of the decision had settled deep in her chest. She stepped off the train, her boots crunching against the gravel as she scanned the platform. It was quieter than she expected, with only a handful of people standing by, their eyes taking in her every move. There were no grand welcomes, no warm greetings. Just the silence of a town waiting for something to happen. A cowboy in worn jeans and a faded shirt caught her eye as he stepped forward. His eyes, as blue as the sky above, seemed to see right through her, not with curiosity, but with something deeper, something almost familiar. He didn't smile, didn't make a fuss, just nodded. "You must be Hannah," he said, his voice deep and calm. "I'm Jason." He wasn't the tall, broad-shouldered figure she had imagined in her mind. He wasn't the charming, confident man she had pictured. Instead, he was quieter, rougher around the edges, with a hardened look in his eyes that spoke of years spent alone, working the land. He wasn't what she had expected, and for the first time in a long while, she felt an unexpected sense of relief. There was no grand romance waiting for her in the dusty town of Copper Creek, but maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for something more, something real. She followed him to the wagon, feeling the weight of her past life slip further away with every step. The wagon creaked as Jason led it down the dirt road, the wooden wheels scraping against the earth. Hannah sat in silence beside him, the wind tugging at her hair as they passed wide-open fields and rolling hills. The town of Copper Creek faded behind them, and she couldn't help but feel a strange sense of freedom, even though she had no idea what awaited her. Jason said little as they traveled, his eyes fixed ahead, his posture rigid and unyielding. She had expected more conversation, perhaps a greeting, some small talk, but his silence was heavy, as if he carried a weight much heavier than his rugged appearance suggested. Hannah's thoughts wandered back to her life before this. The high society events, the glittering parties, the endless parade of meaningless conversations. She had felt invisible there, a doll dressed in fine clothes, playing a part she never wanted to be in. But here, in this quiet, lonely stretch of road, she felt a sense of clarity she hadn't known in years. There was no pretending here, no pressure to fit in. She could just be. She looked over at Jason, wondering what had brought him to this life. The few words he had spoken to her when they met, "I'm Jason. You must be Hannah," had been blunt, but there was something in his voice that told her he wasn't the type to waste time on pleasantries. Maybe it was the land, the isolation, the years of hard work that had shaped him into the man he was. Maybe it was the loss. His eyes were like steel, cold and unyielding. but she could sense something softer underneath, something buried deep. The kind of vulnerability she knew all too well. He didn't speak for the entire journey, and Hannah, too, was unsure of what to say. What did she know of cowboy life? Of ranching in the land? She had only known luxury, the finest silks, and grand estates. Yet, here she was, leaving it all behind. A part of her felt ashamed, like she didn't belong. The other part, the one that had long been buried under layers of perfect gowns and polished smiles, felt alive again. As they approached the ranch, the landscape changed. The hills gave way to wide stretches of open land, and the homestead came into view, a modest house surrounded by a few barns and fences. It wasn't grand, but it was real. She could see the smoke rising from the chimney, the small signs of life. Jason pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house and turned to her. "This is it," he said simply. Hannah looked at the homestead. It wasn't the sprawling mansion she had envisioned, but it had a warmth to it, a charm that wasn't found in the cold, impersonal halls of her old life. She felt a flicker of hope in her chest. Maybe this was the fresh start she had been looking for. Maybe this was where she would finally find peace. But as she stepped down from the wagon, the reality of her decision hit her. This was it. No going back. She was alone, in a place she had never been before, with a man she barely knew. And yet, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with shades of pink and gold, she felt something stir inside her. Something she hadn't felt in years. A sense of possibility. The evening air was cool as Jason led Hannah inside the modest house. The creak of the door echoed through the empty room, and the scent of wood smoke and earth filled her nostrils. She paused for a moment, taking in her new surroundings. The house was small, with a stone fireplace at one end, a few simple wooden chairs, and a worn kitchen table in the center. It was far from the grand mansions of her old life, but it felt real, comfortable even. Jason set the reins down, his movements slow and deliberate. He glanced over at her. "You can make yourself at home," he said, his voice low. "Dinner will be ready soon." Hannah nodded, unsure of what to say. She had no experience with the kind of life Jason led. The women she had known back in New York were all graceful, polished, always in the finest gowns, talking of the latest fashions or the best opera. But none of that had ever felt genuine to her. She wondered if she could find the same peace in this simple life. As Jason disappeared into the kitchen, Hannah walked to the small window. She could see the ranch in the distance, stretching out for miles. The rolling hills, the grazing cattle, and the vast, endless sky. It was all so different from the cityscape she had known. She thought of the busy streets, the crowded parties, the endless noise that had surrounded her in New York. It had all been a facade, a show, and she had been part of it. Now, here, she was alone, in a place where silence was a constant companion, but it wasn't the silence she had once dreaded. It was different here. It felt like an invitation, like a space waiting to be filled with something new. She turned her gaze back to the room, her eyes settling on the fireplace. The flames flickered softly, casting a warm glow on the walls. It wasn't much, but it was enough. She had always believed that happiness came from the things you could see and touch, the luxuries, the fine clothes, the jewels. But now, she wasn't so sure. Was happiness something deeper, something simpler? She wasn't sure, but maybe, just maybe, this was where she would find it. Jason returned with a simple meal of bread, cheese, and stew. He set it on the table without a word, and they sat down together in silence. The food was plain, but it tasted better than anything she had ever had in New York. There was no pretension here, no need to impress anyone. It was just food, just two people sharing a meal. She realized that, in that moment, she was exactly where she was supposed to be. As the night drew on, the fire crackling softly in the background, Hannah found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't in years. The weight of her past, the pressure to conform, seemed to meld away with every passing second. For the first time in a long while, she felt free. Free from the expectations, free from the judgments, free from the life that had never truly been hers. This was her new beginning. The question, though, was whether she was ready to embrace it fully, whether she could leave behind everything she had known and accept the life that Jason was offering. She didn't know yet, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid to find out. The days passed in a quiet rhythm, and with each sunrise, Hannah grew more accustomed to the life she had chosen. The work was hard, but simple, and she found satisfaction in it, a satisfaction she hadn't known in her old life. There were no extravagant gowns or balls, no glittering jewels or fast-paced city life. Only the vast expanse of the land, the smell of earth and fresh air, and the steady presence of Jason. She woke early each morning to tend to the fire, prepare breakfast, and help Jason with the chores around the ranch. At first, she had struggled with the physical labor, her hands sore and calloused from work she had never imagined doing. But as the days turned into weeks, her body grew stronger, and so did her confidence. There was something about working with her hands, something grounding in it. She found herself growing more comfortable in her own skin, less concerned with appearances, and more focused on the simple, honest work that filled her days. Jason said little, as always, his focus on the tasks at hand. He seemed to take comfort in the silence that hung between them, and though their conversations were brief, Hannah felt a sense of connection with him that she hadn't expected. It wasn't the passionate romance she had once imagined, but something more steady, more enduring. One evening, as they sat by the fire after a long day of work, Jason finally spoke more than a few words. "You're doing well here," he said, his voice gruff but genuine. "It's not easy, but you've stuck with it." Hannah looked at him, surprised by the compliment. She had grown accustomed to his quiet demeanor, his reserved nature, but there was something in the way he said those words that made her feel seen. She smiled softly, feeling a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the fire in front of them. "I've never done anything like this before," she admitted. "But it feels right, in a way I never expected." Jason nodded, his gaze turning back to the flames. "Sometimes, things don't look the way we thought they would. But that doesn't mean they aren't right." His words hung in the air, and for the first time, Hannah understood what he meant. She had come here seeking something more real, something more meaningful, and although the life she had imagined wasn't what she found, perhaps this was better. Perhaps this was exactly what she had needed all along. The next morning, Jason took her with him to the farthest corner of the ranch. They rode on horseback, the wind whipping through her hair as the landscape stretched out before them. The open sky, the distant hills, the fields of grazing cattle. It was a different kind of beauty than she had ever known, and it stirred something deep inside her. As they reached the edge of the land, Jason stopped and pointed out across the fields. "This is what I work for," he said quietly. "Not just for me, but for something more. Something to build on." Hannah watched him closely, seeing the quiet determination in his eyes. She realized then that the man before her was more than just a cowboy. He was someone who had built his life from the ground up, someone who had endured loss and hardship and still found a way to keep going. And in that moment, she saw him, really saw him, in a way she hadn't before. He wasn't what she had expected. He wasn't the charming, polished man she had imagined in her fantasies. But he was real. He was steady. And he was good. As they rode back to the ranch, Hannah felt a new sense of certainty. The future was still uncertain, still a vast unknown. But for the first time, she didn't feel afraid. Whatever came next, she was ready. And with Jason beside her, she knew she wasn't alone. As the days went by, the bond between Jason and Hannah grew stronger. It was a quiet kind of connection, forged not through words, but through shared moments and simple gestures. Jason continued to work the land, his days filled with the steady rhythm of ranching, while Hannah found her place beside him, helping with whatever tasks came their way. She had come to appreciate the stillness of their life together, the way the world seemed to slow down when she was with him. The mornings were the best part of the day. Hannah would wake early, feeling the cool morning air against her skin, and would make her way outside to the barn. Jason was always already there, tending to the animals or preparing for the day ahead. He never rushed, never seemed in a hurry, and there was something peaceful about that. Over time, Hannah learned the rhythms of ranch life. She learned how to care for the chickens, milk the cows, and even handle the horses. The work was hard, but it was rewarding in ways she hadn't expected. Each task, no matter how small, felt like a step forward, a way to prove that she belonged in this world. Jason never asked for her help, never expected it, but he always seemed grateful when she pitched in. He would nod, his eyes softening for just a moment, and then return to his work. In the evenings, when the chores were done, they would sit together on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink. The quiet was comfortable, and for the first time in her life, Hannah didn't feel the need for anything more. She was content, and that was a feeling she hadn't known in years. One evening, as they sat together, Jason spoke, his voice low and steady. "You're doing good here," he said. "Better than I ever expected." Hannah looked at him, surprised by the words. She had never been good with compliments, never knew how to respond to them, but there was something in the way he said it that made her heart swell. She smiled softly, her fingers tracing the edge of her cup. "I never thought I'd be doing this," she admitted. "But it feels right. More right than anything I've ever done." Jason nodded, his gaze turning back to the horizon. The land stretched out before them, vast and endless, and for a moment, they both sat in silence, lost in the beauty of it all. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, Hannah realized that this life, this quiet life on the ranch, had become more than just a fresh start. It had become home. And Jason, stoic, reserved Jason, had become more than just a man she had married out of necessity. He had become her partner, her equal, and, in ways she never expected, her best friend. But there was still something unspoken between them, something neither of them had addressed. A question that lingered in the air, waiting for the right moment to be asked. And one evening, as the stars filled the sky and the night air grew cooler, Hannah finally asked the question that had been on her mind for weeks. "Jason," she began, her voice soft but steady, "do you ever think about the future?" Jason didn't answer immediately. He stared into the fire for a long moment, his face unreadable, before turning to her. "I think about it," he said quietly, "but I don't know what it holds. All I know is, I'm here. And I'm glad you're here too." Hannah felt a weight lift off her shoulders at his words. She wasn't sure what the future would bring, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid. Whatever came next, they would face it together. And that was enough for her. The seasons shifted, and with each passing month, the bond between Hannah and Jason deepened. The days were still filled with work, but now there was a quiet ease to everything they did. The mornings were spent caring for the animals, feeding the chickens, collecting eggs, and checking on the cattle. Jason would often head out to the far corners of the ranch, inspecting the fences and the land, while Hannah stayed close to the house, tending to the garden or working on repairs that needed doing. The steady rhythm of their lives felt comforting, like the gentle pull of the earth beneath their feet. One evening, after a long day of work, Jason and Hannah sat on the porch together, the sun dipping below the horizon in a burst of vibrant color. The sky was a canvas of pinks, oranges, and purples, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. There was a stillness between them, not uncomfortable, but filled with the unspoken understanding that had grown over time. Jason was the first to break the silence. "You've made this place feel like home," he said, his voice low but sincere. Hannah looked at him, surprised by the compliment. She had never expected this kind of acknowledgement from him, especially not after all the time they had spent together in such quiet, everyday routines. "I never thought I would," she replied softly, a small smile playing at the corners of her lips. "But somehow, it feels like it was always meant to be this way." Jason nodded, his gaze drifting toward the distant hills. "I've never been one for many words," he said after a pause. "But I've come to realize that some things don't need to be said. We've built something here, something that feels real." Hannah's heart warmed at his words. She had always felt like an outsider in her old life, surrounded by people who were more concerned with appearances than with anything of true value. But here, with Jason, there were no pretensions, no false facades. It was just them, living day by day, finding comfort in each other's presence. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, Hannah found herself growing even more comfortable in her new life. The work was hard, but it was honest, and there was a satisfaction in it that she had never known before. She had learned to find joy in the small things, the smell of fresh bread baking in the oven, the sound of the wind rustling through the trees, the quiet moments spent with Jason as they sat side by side in the fading light of the day. But there was still something inside her, a lingering question that refused to be silenced. One evening, as they shared a simple meal together, Hannah finally spoke the question that had been on her mind for weeks. "Jason," she began, her voice tentative, "do you ever wonder what would have happened if we hadn't met? If I hadn't come here, Jason looked at her, his brow furrowing slightly as if the question had caught him off guard. He took a moment before answering, his gaze softening as he spoke. I don't know what would have happened, he said quietly. But I know this. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad we met. His words, simple as they were, meant more to her than anything else. In that moment, Hannah realized that it wasn't about the life she had left behind or the future that still loomed uncertainly ahead. What mattered was the present, the life she was living now, the life she had built with Jason, and the love that was quietly blossoming between them, in its own time and its own way. As the evening faded into night, and the stars began to twinkle above them, Hannah felt a sense of peace wash over her. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. Whatever came next, she would face it with Jason by her side. The months continued to roll by, each one blending into the next with the familiar rhythm of ranch life. As summer turned into fall, the air grew crisp, and the golden leaves of the trees shimmered in the breeze. Jason and Hannah had settled into a comfortable routine, the steady rhythm of work and quiet companionship weaving their lives together. Jason still kept to his usual quiet self, but there was a noticeable shift in him, a gentleness that had developed over time. He would often catch her eye with a soft smile, or give her a subtle nod of approval when she completed a task well. It was small, these gestures, but to Hannah, they meant the world. It wasn't just the work that had brought them together. It was the silent understanding that had grown between them, a bond that neither of them could have anticipated when they first met. Hannah, too, had changed. The woman who had once been so out of place in her own world, so wrapped up in appearances, had found a new kind of confidence here. It wasn't in her clothing or in what others thought of her. It was in the quiet strength that came with doing honest work. It was in the way she now saw herself, not as the daughter of a wealthy family, but as someone who had built a life. For herself, someone who belonged. One evening, after a long day of work, Hannah stood outside the barn, the last of the daylight fading from the sky. She could hear Jason's footsteps behind her, and before she could turn, she felt his presence beside her. He didn't speak, but his quiet company was enough. They stood together in silence, looking out at the land, the distant mountains now tinged with the colors of sunset. After a while, Jason spoke, his voice soft. This place, it's more than I ever thought it would be. Hannah looked at him, her heart catching at his words. It's more than I thought, too, she said, her voice steady but full of emotion. I never imagined I would feel like this. At home. Like, I'm really here, you know. Jason nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving the horizon. Sometimes, you don't know what you're looking for until you find it, he said quietly. And when you find it, it feels right. Like it was always meant to be. Hannah didn't say anything, but the words settled deep in her heart. It was true. All of it. She had come here looking for something different, something real, and in the quiet moments with Jason, in the honest work they did together, she had found it. Her life had changed in ways she couldn't have predicted, and as the sun dipped lower, the sky a canvas of fading light, she realized that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The next morning, as the first light of day touched the earth, Jason came to her with a small, weathered box in his hands. I've been meaning to give this to you, he said, his voice gruff, yet soft. Hannah took the box from him, a curious smile tugging at her lips. She opened it carefully, revealing a simple, silver ring inside. It wasn't extravagant, but it sparkled in the morning light, a quiet symbol of something that had grown between them. I don't have much, Jason said, his eyes meeting hers. But what I do have, I want to share with you. This land, this life, and he hesitated for a moment, before continuing. You. Hannah's heart swelled as she took the ring in her hand, a feeling of warmth spreading through her. She had never imagined that a life like this could hold so much. That love could be so simple, so real. I don't need anything more than this, she whispered, looking up at him. I don't need anything more than you. Jason smiled, a rare and soft smile, one that made her heart skip a beat. And as they stood there, hand in hand, the promise of the future seemed clear. They didn't need grand gestures or lavish things. All they needed was this, each other, and the life they had built together. Whatever came next, they would face it side by side, knowing that together, they had everything they needed. As the months passed, the bond between Jason and Hannah continued to grow. The seasons changed, and the landscape around them shifted with the rhythm of time. The golden hues of autumn gave way to the stark beauty of winter, and with it, the ranch became quieter, more solitary. The biting cold of the air, the crunch of snow beneath their boots, and the quiet hum of the fire in the hearth made the days feel slower, but in the best way. It was in the stillness of winter that Hannah realized just how much she had come to love this life. The work, the land, the simple routines, all of it had become her world. She had never imagined that a life of such simplicity could bring her so much peace. Jason, as always, was a man of few words, but his actions spoke volumes. He had become the steady presence in her life, the one who had shown her what it meant to work for something, to build something real. He had taught her to be patient, to trust in the slow, steady progress that came from hard work and dedication. One evening, as they sat together by the fire, Jason turned to her, his expression serious but gentle. "You've done more for this place than you think," he said. His voice was quiet, but there was a sincerity in it that made Hannah's heart swell. "I couldn't have done it without you." Hannah looked at him, her heart beating faster than usual. She had heard Jason speak before, but there was something about his words that night that felt different, more meaningful. "I'm just doing my part," she replied, her voice steady but soft. "This is our life now, and I wouldn't have it any other way." Jason nodded, his gaze softening as he looked at her. "I know," he said quietly, "and I'm grateful for it. For you." For the first time in a long while, Hannah felt the full weight of those words. She had always been the one to give, the one to make things work, but here, in this life, with Jason, she felt like she was part of something bigger than herself. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was truly living. The weeks passed, and winter's grip on the ranch began to loosen. The snow started to melt, and the first signs of spring began to show. The earth slowly began to thaw, and with it, the promise of new beginnings. The ranch was no longer just a place where they worked. It had become home. And with that home, came a sense of belonging that neither Jason nor Hannah had ever truly known before. One afternoon, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the land, Jason came to Hannah with a familiar look in his eyes. It was the same look he had given her when he had first chosen her all those months ago, the same quiet determination. "There's something I've been meaning to ask you," he said, his voice steady, but the slightest tremor in it that Hannah hadn't heard before. She turned to him, her heart picking up its pace. "What is it?" she asked, her voice soft and expectant. Jason took a deep breath, as if gathering his thoughts. "I want you to stay here, with me, for good, to make this place our home, together." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, the world around them seemed to pause. It wasn't a grand gesture, no fireworks or fanfare, just a simple, honest request. And in that moment, Hannah knew without a doubt that this was exactly where she belonged. She stepped closer to him, her hand reaching out to gently touch his. "I already am home," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "With you." Jason smiled, a smile that spoke of relief, of hope, and of something much deeper than words could express. They stood there together, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors that mirrored the warmth between them. The future was still uncertain, still unknown, but for the first time in her life, Hannah was no longer afraid. She had found her place, and with Jason by her side, she knew she had everything she needed. The seasons continued to shift, and with them, the days grew longer, bringing a warmth that Jason and Hannah had been waiting for. The snow had melted from the ground, and the ranch slowly began to wake up. New buds appeared on the trees, the grass turned green again, and the air smelled fresh, filled with the promise of spring. They had spent the winter together, building a quiet life, and now, with the arrival of the new season, their work seemed to have purpose beyond just survival. The days were spent clearing fields, mending fences, and preparing for the months ahead. It was work that brought them closer, a shared understanding that this was the life they had built together, piece by piece. They worked side by side, their hands touching more often, their glances lingering longer, and the unspoken connection between them deepening each day. Jason had never been one to speak much about his past, but every now and then, in the quiet of the evening, he would share bits and pieces with her. He talked about the ranch, the land, the hardships he had faced, and the loneliness that had followed after he lost his wife. As he spoke, Hannah realized how much of himself he had given to this place, how much of his heart he had poured into the land. It was not just about the cattle or the crops. It was about the life he had tried to create, despite the losses. One evening, as they sat on the porch, the sky painted with the colors of sunset, Jason turned to her. "You've made all the difference," he said quietly. His voice was steady, but there was a softness to it that took her by surprise. "I never thought I could be happy again, not after everything that happened. But you've made this place feel like home again." Hannah's heart swelled at his words. It was the first time he had opened up to her like this, and in that moment, she understood the depth of what they had built together. She wasn't just the woman who had come here to escape a past she no longer wanted. She was his partner, his equal, someone who had become as much a part of this land as he was. "I never thought I'd find a place like this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I never thought I'd find a home, or someone who truly sees me." Jason reached over, his hand brushing hers. The touch was simple, yet it spoke volumes. "I see you," he said softly. "You're exactly where you belong." As the days grew warmer, they began to plan for the future, not just for the ranch, but for their life together. They spoke of building a family, of growing old side by side, of taking on whatever challenges life would throw their way. It wasn't a perfect life, but it was theirs, and it was real. And for the first time in her life, Hannah felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. One morning, as they walked through the fields together, Jason stopped and looked at her. His expression was serious, but his eyes held a hint of something softer, something she had never seen before. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice steady. "I want you to stay here. Not just for now, but for always. I want this life with you, Hannah. I want it all." Hannah felt her breath catch in her throat as the weight of his words sank in. She had never imagined a life like this, a life where she was truly wanted, truly loved. "I'm already here," she said, her heart racing. "I'm exactly where I need to be." Jason smiled, a small, genuine smile that made her heart swell. "Good," he said, "because I don't plan on going anywhere without you." As they stood there in the field, the sun shining down on them, Hannah realized that the future was no longer something to be afraid of. Together, they had built a life, and together, they would face whatever came next. The world was wide, and there was still so much left to discover, but for the first time, she wasn't worried. She had found her home, her family, and the man she would spend the rest of her days with. As the days continued to pass, Jason and Hannah settled deeper into their life on the ranch. The work became second nature to them, the seasons changing, and with each turn of the earth, they found themselves more in sync. Spring was fully underway, and the ranch was alive with new life. The animals were thriving, the crops were growing, and the land seemed to hum with energy. It was a feeling neither of them had ever known before, a sense of fulfillment in the work they did, in the life they had built. The nights were still quiet, but there was something different about the stillness now. It wasn't empty or lonely anymore. It was peaceful, comforting, as though the world had finally slowed down enough for them to catch their breath. One evening, after a long day, Jason and Hannah sat together on the porch, watching the sun sink below the horizon. The sky was painted with deep oranges and pinks, a beautiful reminder of the simple things that filled their lives. Jason turned to her, his gaze soft, almost hesitant. "I've been thinking about what you said," he said, his voice steady but with an edge of vulnerability. Hannah looked at him, her heart stirring at the sincerity in his tone. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice quiet. Jason took a deep breath, his hand resting on the wooden railing of the porch. "About staying here. About making this our home," he said slowly. "I know we've built something together, and I can't imagine going back to how things were. Not without you." Hannah's heart swelled, and for a moment, the world around them seemed to fade away. The ranch, the land, the quiet moments, they had become her everything. She had never thought she would find something so real, so solid. Jason was no longer just a man she had married out of necessity. He had become her partner, her equal. "I don't want to go anywhere else," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. "This is where I want to be. With you. Always." Jason's eyes softened, and for the first time, she saw something new in them, a quiet, steadfast love that had been growing between them all along. He reached out, gently taking her hand in his. "You've made this place feel like home," he said, "and that means more to me than anything else." Hannah smiled, her fingers tightening around his. It wasn't the life she had imagined when she first left New York, but it was everything she had ever needed. "We've made it together," she said softly. Jason nodded, a small smile playing at the corner of his lips. "Together," he repeated, his voice filled with the quiet promise of a future they would share. As the stars began to appear in the night sky, they sat in comfortable silence, their hands still intertwined. The world felt vast, the future uncertain, but there was a calmness in knowing that whatever came next, they would face it side by side. In that moment, Hannah knew that she had found her place. She had found her home, not in a grand house or a life of luxury, but in the simple, honest love they had built. And it was more than enough. The road ahead might be long, but it was theirs to walk together. And that was all that mattered. The months rolled on, and with the change of seasons came a new sense of certainty. Jason and Hannah had settled into a rhythm that was as comforting as the land itself. The warm summer days faded into cooler evenings, and the ranch had begun to feel like their own piece of the world. Together, they worked side by side, building not just a life, but a future. The routine was simple, but it held a kind of peace that neither of them had expected. They were no longer just surviving. They were thriving. One afternoon, as the sun hung low in the sky, Jason and Hannah sat on the porch, the faint sound of crickets filling the air. The land around them stretched out in every direction, vast and endless, but it no longer felt intimidating. It felt like home. Jason turned to her, his gaze soft but filled with something deeper, something that had been quietly growing between them since the beginning. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" he said, his voice low, a smile tugging at his lips. Hannah met his eyes, the warmth of his words sinking deep into her heart. "We have," she agreed. "I never imagined this life, but now that I'm here, it feels like it was always meant to be this way." Jason nodded, his expression turning thoughtful. "When I first brought you here, I didn't know what to expect. I just knew I needed help, but it's been more than that. You've made this place more than just a piece of land. You've made it a home." Hannah's heart swelled at his words. It wasn't just the work that had brought them closer, it was the quiet understanding they had developed over time, the unspoken bond that had woven them together day by day. She had never imagined this life could hold so much meaning, so much depth. She reached out, taking his hand in hers, her fingers tracing the lines of his palm. "I never thought I would find this," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "A place where I belong. A life that's mine." Jason squeezed her hand gently, his eyes softening as he looked at her. "It's ours," he said, "and that's what matters." The days continued to unfold, and with each one, they grew closer, more intertwined. They worked the land, they cared for the animals, they shared quiet moments, and slowly, a new future began to take shape. One that was theirs, built from the ground up. As fall settled into the land, the harvest season began. The ranch was alive with activity, the smell of fresh hay and the sound of busy feet filling the air. They worked together, side by side, collecting the crops and ensuring everything was ready for the months ahead. It was hard work, but it felt good, and every task seemed more meaningful because they were doing it together. One evening, as the stars began to twinkle in the darkening sky, Jason stood beside her, looking out over the land they had cultivated together. "I never thought this was what I needed," he said quietly, his voice low. "But now, I can't imagine anything else." Hannah smiled, her heart full. "Neither can I," she replied softly. "This is everything." And it was. They had built something real, something solid, something that would last. Together, they had found their place in the world. And as they stood there, hand in hand, the future stretched out before them, not as an unknown, but as a promise they would keep. Whatever came next, they would face it together. No matter how hard the work, no matter the challenges, they had each other. And that was all they needed. As winter began to creep in, the ranch settled into a new rhythm, the land turning colder with each passing day. The days were shorter now, the nights longer, and the stillness of the season seemed to stretch out before them like the endless sky above. Jason and Hannah worked through the chill, the air, crisp and fresh, the smell of burning wood filling the air as they took care of the animals and prepared for the colder months. It was hard work, but it was familiar now, something they both did with ease. Their shared moments had become more meaningful as the world around them slowed down. The winter months were often quieter than the others, but there was something comforting in that quiet. It was in these peaceful, still days that Hannah realized how much she had changed, how much this life had shaped her. She was no longer the woman who had stepped off the train all those months ago, uncertain and unsure. She had become a part of the land, a part of the life they were building together. Jason, too, seemed different. The man who had been so quiet, so reserved, had slowly opened up to her in a way she had never expected. He still didn't say much, but his actions spoke louder than any words ever could. He would bring her small gifts, flowers he had picked from the fields, a carved piece of wood he had made during the evenings when they weren't working, and with each gesture, she saw how deeply he cared for her. One evening, as the fire crackled in the hearth and the wind howled outside, Jason and Hannah sat together in the warmth of the cabin, the world outside feeling far away. Jason looked at her with an intensity she hadn't seen before, his blue eyes soft in the firelight. "I've never been one for promises," he said quietly, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "But I promise you, Hannah, I'll always be here, with you, no matter what comes." His words hung in the air, and for a moment, everything else seemed to fade away. Hannah's heart swelled, and for the first time, she felt the full weight of what they had built. It wasn't just the land, or the work, or even the days spent in silence. It was the love that had grown between them, the quiet understanding, the shared moments that had woven their lives together. She reached out, taking his hand in hers, feeling the warmth of his touch. "I know," she whispered. "I'm not going anywhere either." And she meant it. She had found her place here, with him, in a life that was simple but full of meaning. It wasn't the life she had imagined when she first left New York, but it was the life she had always needed. And in that moment, as they sat together in the quiet of the evening, they both understood that no matter where life took them, they had each other. The world outside might be cold and uncertain, but inside, they had built something solid, something that could withstand anything. Together, they had found home, and that was all they needed. As the first snowflakes of the season began to fall, the ranch took on a new kind of beauty. The landscape, covered in a soft blanket of white, was peaceful, serene, and still. Jason and Hannah stood side by side in the stillness of the evening, watching the snow accumulate, the world growing quieter with each passing moment. The ranch had become more than just a place. It had become their life, their home, and now, with the winter setting in, they both felt a sense of finality, as if they had reached the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. The days had become shorter, but in the quiet of the evenings, when the fire crackled in the hearth, they felt closer than ever. They would sit together, talking softly about the future, about the work they still had ahead of them, and about the life they had built. There was no rush anymore, no sense of urgency. They were content, finding joy in the simple moments, in the steady, reliable rhythm of their days. One evening, as they shared a meal by the fire, Jason looked at her, his expression soft and thoughtful. "You know," he said quietly, "I've been thinking a lot about how far we've come. When you first got here, I didn't know what to expect. But now," he paused, as if choosing his words carefully, "now, I can't imagine this life without you in it." Hannah felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. She had come here uncertain, unsure of what the future held, but now, with Jason by her side, she knew she had found the place she was meant to be. "I can't imagine it without you either," she replied, her voice steady but full of emotion. Jason smiled, a small, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "We've built something special here, haven't we?" said. "Something real." Hannah nodded, her heart full. "More than I ever imagined," she whispered. Jason's gaze softened, and for a moment, they sat in silence, the only sound the soft crackling of the fire. Outside, the snow continued to fall, but inside, they were warm, wrapped in the comfort of each other's presence. "We've got a good thing going," Jason said after a while, his voice low but filled with conviction. "And I want to keep it that way. I want to build a future with you. A real one." Hannah looked at him, her heart racing at his words. "I want that too," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I want to build it with you, together." Jason took her hand in his touch warm and steady. "Then we will," he said simply. "We've got everything we need right here. And as long as we have that, nothing else matters." The snow outside continued to fall, covering the world in a soft, quiet blanket. Inside, they sat together, knowing that whatever the future held, they would face it side by side, ready for whatever came next. They had built something real, something unbreakable, and that was all they needed. With the warmth of the fire and the steady beat of their hearts, they knew they had everything they needed to make it through whatever challenges lay ahead. Together, they had found their place in the world, and that was enough.